From 1980 to 1990, the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society has released videos documenting the journeys and adventures of their steam locomotive, Nickel Plate Road 765. During that period, the 765 has seen new territory and even ran on lines that she was already familiar with. 3 videos document some of these exceptional trips and are part of what I call the 765 Trilogy. These 3 videos are Wheeling in the Rat Hole, Life Begins at 40, and Running That New River Train. Join me as we take a look back at 765's best moments of her excursion career, all captured on video. This is my review of the 765 Trilogy. Wheeling in the Rat Hole was originally released on VHS in 1983 and centers around 765 running her first full season in 1982. This video features scenes of her operating on the Wheeling and Lake Erie and on the Southern Railway. This gave the 765 a chance to experience some new rails and allowed her to run at her full potential. Clearly, it was a success. So, let's see how she did by taking a look at Wheeling in the Rat Hole. So, we open up with a, well, really good intro. The music sets the mood really well, and it certainly got me hyped up. One thing I noticed is that they are using scenes that you see later on in the video, but it's not really a problem. Then, the narrator tells us what we're going to see in the video.
In the summer of 1982, the Orville Railroad Heritage Committee, the Mad River and Nickel Plate Museum, the Norfolk Southern Railroad, and the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society pooled their talents and set the stage for Nickel Plate Burke number 765's return to mainline excursion service.
And with that, we're off to the feature presentation.
Wheeling in Lake Erie between Bellevue and Brewster. 65 miles an hour was achieved on many occasions. This is the 1982 story of the 765. So watch her now as she does some wheeling in the rat hole. At the end of the 1980 season, you may recall that the 765 was having a few problems.
So, the narrator explains that after the 1980 season ended, some of 765's superheater units failed. Now, this is where I should explain something. There was a video that came before this called Extra 765 West. I didn't include it in this review series because it only documents one excursion and I don't have it in my collection. Now, about the 765 superheater. They probably touched on this subject in the previous video, but since I don't have it, it didn't ring any bells. But they solved the 765's problem in a way that I never would have expected.
Nickel Plate Burke number 755 was on permanent display at the Conneaut Railroad Museum in Conneaut, Ohio. The 755 had had her entire superheater replaced just before she was retired, and the tubes were like new. The Fort Wayne crew removed the tubes from the 755 and installed them in the 765.
So, now in 1982, a committee in Orville, Ohio were running trips between Bellevue and Orville as the highlight of their festivities during the Depot Days event. So, the 765, ready for work, was about to tackle the Wheeling and Lake Erie main line. Something else I noticed is that this was before 765 gained a famous whistle. You know, the one that sounds like this. So, leaving Bellevue and making brief passenger stops along the way, the 765 makes her way east to Orville. One more thing, by the way. In some of these scenes, you'll hear a different whistle, a Penzie 3 chime. This is somewhat inconsistent because that whistle was fitted on the next weekend's excursion, which you'll see later in the video. But, moving on. Upon arriving in Orville, the 765 was serviced for the return trip. However, Orville doesn't have a wire turntable.
So she would have to go east a few miles to Brewster to be turned.
Hold it. What is that? So apparently that was one of the green SD-39s that the Norfolk and Western received when they purchased the Illinois terminal. It kind of threw me off there because it's green. Anyway, the 765 gets turned around on the Brewster turntable. Afterwards, she pulls the return leg of her trip back to Bellevue.
The next weekend, the 765 was to travel the same piece of railroad, only the endpoints of the trip were reversed.
So, the next excursion was from Orville to Bellevue for the Cherry Blossom Festival. There isn't much footage from the outbound trip, but there are a couple of good shots. The return trip? Oh my goodness, I love this scene. They matched the footage with some really booming music, which sounds fitting for a high-speed express run. I mean, just watch this. I could not think of a better way to round out 2 awesome weekends on the Wheeling and Lake Erie. So, the 765 heads back to Bellevue, to where it was expected she would spend the rest of the year. But on the Southern Railway, all was not well.
The 2716 is the Southern's newest locomotive, and she had developed a few mechanical problems that took her out of service almost before she started.
So, for those of you who don't know, the Southern Railway purchased C&O 2716 and used her on excursions for a short time. However, her mechanical difficulties took her out of service real quick. So, the Southern solved their problem with some help from the FWRHF.
The Southern agreed to lease the 765 to finish out the schedule originally drawn up for the 2716.
Now in late summer, the 765 has been put on point of the Southern Railway excursion consist and will pull excursions between Lexington, Kentucky and Chattanooga, Tennessee. Those of you who are Southern Region Rail fans will know exactly what route this is.
The 2nd District of the Cincinnati, New Orleans, and Texas Pacific Railroad, otherwise known as the Rat Hole Division.
So, the 765 makes a brief stop at Danville, Kentucky to have a crew change. These scenes on the Southern are really beautiful. The early fall colors, the cool scenery, it just looks great. Not to mention, this was one of the most famous routes that the 765 has ever run. And so, the 765 will continue her stint on the Southern in that fashion, running excursions along the Rat Hole. But, there's just a little bit more. The 765 passed the Kentucky and Tennessee Railway headquarters in Stearns, Kentucky, on one of her trips.
But the K&T's claim to fame lies in old number 12. Now, you probably know K&T number 12 as Southern 4501, a locomotive that has been in railroad service almost continuously since she was built in 1911.
After the excursion season ended, the 765 headed back to Bellevue, where she would spend the winter. So, how does Wheeling and the Rat Hole hold up? Well, it's awesome. This video showed 765 at her best, running on rails that she never ran on before. She did magnificently, and showed everyone what Lima's superpower can do. Would I recommend this DVD? Of course! If you want to see 765 at high speeds on foreign rails, then this is the video for you. Wheeling in the Rat Hole was great, but if you want to see something that will probably top it, then just wait until next time. Coming up next is my review of Life Begins at 40.